All right, I'm here tonight with my wonderful grandpa and my good friend Jared Greider. We're at my grandpa's house, and we're going to be talking about classic country, right? So, when would you say that started?
Well, we were just talking a minute ago that, it seemed like kind of the 50s were, in my head, a spot that some things sort of developed and began to kind of separate a bit. The 40s had a lot of big band sounds and a lot of interesting music with lots of complex chord structures and texture and feel to it. But about the 50s or so, we saw the development of particularly the electric guitar. And so I think it was the kind of some of that progress in with that instrument that allowed rock and roll now suddenly began to be, a little more um, defined or separate from some other things there. And at the same time, it felt like um, gospel was kind of going on here, but you started seeing a lot of three chord country, real traditional kind of classic country out of the 50s begin to develop. And, the Grand Ole Opry, I think suddenly, blossomed and become vogue. They were going before that there, but yeah, and suddenly they're they're there. And so, yeah, with the 50s, it sort of began to develop and grow. And 60s, rock and roll separated even a little further, not only the electric guitar, but everybody had a fuzz tone or fuzz box, and and distortion was kind of a thing, and loud and rowdy and that kind of thing, and there's sort of a blue collar country, I think, that kind of began to emerge in the
Rednecks,
60s.
White
Yeah,
Sox, and
yeah,
Blue Ribbon Beer.
yeah. That was kind of that there. 70s saw some more development of that. 80s, I think, were kind of I think of it as I said the Alabama era was kind of that style, but 90s was kind of steel guitar and fiddle and yeah, well, that's the stuff I happen to like there too. But so I think kind of a resurgence, a renaissance of some of that 50s stuff there, played a little more outwardly, but yeah, with a little more style and a little more complex chords instead of three chord stuff. We saw four chord things like a seventh and a ninth and a sixth, and Jerry and I was talking there. Maybe it was a lot of Southern influence there. Bob Wills out of Texas and George Strait, and a lot of that kind of style that kind of blossomed.
Well, Bob Wills came out of the big band era.
Yeah,
that's what people were listening to.
Yeah,
Big band and swing primarily.
Yeah,
his style was Western swing, so to speak.
Yeah,
a little bit different twist. A lot of improvisation, a lot of complex chord structure.
Yeah,
but then you got Western music, which
you have country and Western.
Western music, which was based kind of in Southern California, around the movie industry.
Yeah,
and then you got the influence of Arlo Guthrie and Jimmy Rogers and all that, just kind of all colliding. And when the whole electric guitar thing is kind of interesting because orchestras and bands went through an evolution where the stringed instruments weren't loud enough because they didn't have the amplification. So the banjo, primarily the tenor banjo, four-string banjo, or plectrum banjo was the key instrument because it was loud, and they continue to be loud.
Yay, banjos.
And then over time, as amplification and as the ability to mic came along, and eventually electric guitar, the guitar kind of replaced that aspect of it.
Well, the steel guitar, kind of came into vogue there. Some of the early recordings, they were just a basic little front neck, console, three pedals, and some pretty basic playing. But how many evolutions this machine like this today has gone through there, and they're very refined here and complex. Yeah. And so, anyway, so that's a little history.
So it's hard because I feel like with some styles you can say like, oh yes, this one developed straight from this. Like I feel like jazz and blues and gospel, those three are very like intertwined. You can see like how they relate to each other. But with classic country, I feel like it's just kind of like the melting pot of everything. Like we see so many different styles. Would you agree?
Yeah,
But if you look, when he and I grew up, there was a radio station, and typically a local radio station. And initially, they recorded live music.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
That's right.
These were in rural markets, and bands like Flat and Scruggs and
Mm-hmm.
and the Everly Brothers, and I mean, you can just go through name after name that would play on the radio early in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
because they were playing to rural audiences. Back where your home state in Iowa, down in Shenandoah, that was a huge station that had all kinds of people. Charlie, you know who Charlie Hayden is?
I don't.
Old famous bass player. He and his family had a radio show. The Everly Brothers went down there and started.
Denny's dad, Al,
Mm-hmm.
played on the local radio station in Marshalltown every night, once a week. I think it was on a Thursday night. They played. I think it was a 2-hour show. Just go up and set up and play.
These stations were not genre specific. They were audience specific.
Exactly.
They were catering to their rural audience.
Yeah.
And so early in the morning they might have a show like Flat Scruggs that came in live and performed, or local, the Everly Brothers, whoever happened to be taking up residence in that station. And then during the day they were playing across the board, what we would call cross genre now.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't playing just country or classic country or folk, or it wasn't rock and roll wasn't quite around.
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, my first band there in high school there, we couldn't play, we played a lot, but we couldn't play a whole night of any kind of one kind of music, you couldn't play a whole night of rock and roll because people didn't want to, that's not what they heard. You couldn't play a whole night of just country because that's not what they heard. You had to play kind of a mix, and actually some of the songs, you kind of, country songs, maybe you did a little more rock and roll style, or some of the rock and roll style, a little more country like, kind of thing, and you just you blended a lot of the music.
During the course of a night, we played Jimmy Buffett, Merle Haggard, we played
CCR.
Creedence Clearwater Revival. We played the Doobie Brothers.
Yeah. Get crazy and play Ozzy.
And then surf music, even. You go
Oh yeah,
Wipeout,
Wipeout.
Rock Don't Run, that kind of stuff.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so it was just a whole collage of different things, particularly 70s there when we kind of got going there, 60s earlier when I was in a family band.
You think about classic. If you describe the music I grew up on, it was heavily oriented toward people like Ray Price, Jim Reed, George Jones, and Merle Haggard. Those guys laid quite a soundtrack out before Chet Atkins came along and added all the strings to everything. But even then, Ray Price continued to be a big.
He had a style, but again, I think you said exactly right. They catered to audiences, and so music that got popular, it's simply an expression of some kind of thought or feeling, and if it got popular, it just means the general public could relate to it somehow, and so they bought the music or they listened to it, and so a lot of 60s thing. I mentioned kind of blue collar, but I think it was toward a lot of common folk, kind of thing. And so again, lyrically, they sang about a lot of things that you could relate to, and musically, it was kind of easy, and were melodies that kind of stuck and seemed to kind of fit the lyric, and so it kind of catered to an audience there.
Typical day for us.
Yeah.
5:30 in the morning before we went out to milk. The radio would be on, and Mom would be in there clanking around in the kitchen. It was oriented. First, there'd be a farm report, and there'd be something typically from the Granville Opry. Flat and Scruggs was big, at that time.
So
early in the morning. Later in the day, that changed because the audience changed. Men went off to work, and that traditional family was targeted elsewhere.
I remember one of my first jobs, when you get off work, you hop in the car, you turn on the radio. You know what I wanted to hear? Working Man Blues. Because that's kind of, I can relate to it at the moment there. It's a tough job just getting by. So, but yeah.
So
That's it. That's all we know.
hey,
Ask
that
us
was
a
great.
question.
What the heck?
Ask us a question.
So you were kind of saying it was starting in the 50s, like that's where we really start to see it. Could you name a few early artists? You already named a few. You're off the hook. I forgive you. Who are some that like?
In the country field, Hank Williams Sr.
Yes.
Just kind of screams at me there.
Unpopular opinion. I cannot sing for this junior.
Well, so
Senior. That's the man.
well, so you stop and think about how many songs were on the radio and got popular and stuff, and you know he died at an early age. You know, you wonder where that might have gone there had he been around a little longer. But for his short life, there was a lot of material that came through.
Lefty Frizzell in that same era.
Yeah.
Right in that 50s.
Yeah.
That's the way it was in 51. There's a Merle Haggard wrote a song about, you know, Hank and Lefty crowded every jukebox. That's the way it was in 51.
No, yeah, that's maybe one of the biggest ones there that stick out in my mind there in the 50s.
So if you could make like a Mount Rushmore of classic country artists, what four would you pick?
From the 50s? I don't know.
I guess you can pick any. I'll be nice.
George Strait would be. I'm a huge George Strait fan, but again, he sort of epitomized a lot of things musically and stylistically. Classic country with steel guitar and fiddle, which you know still sort of rings today. Garth Brooks had a lot of, I call it the more modern edge to that thing here, but certainly filled the bill there. Alan Jackson, I think, covered a lot of ground on I Need Four. What would the fourth one be?
Clint Black didn't do too bad.
Maybe Jerry Grider would be the fourth one.
Randy Travis didn't do
there was just a lot. Chris Ledoux had kind of that rough cowboy edge, rodeo thing here, and a little rock and rollish edge there to it, and so yeah, there's some things there. But there were a lot of artists there, I think, in the '90s there. That
now, did you have some television stations? We could get 2 or 3 television stations over the air broadcast, but on Saturdays they would have Porter Wagner show.
Yeah,
and then
Dolly.
WLS, Barn Dance. They used to do reruns of that because by that time WLS was playing rock and roll, but they would rebroadcast those old shows, and you'd see June Carter and the Carter family and those folks on.
So there was a local radio station up in Fort Dodge, Iowa, that had a Sunday afternoon event there where they had local town. We had an invitation to go up and actually be on the TV there once. They happened to ask us on a Sunday that we couldn't go, and so never.
Going to go far, going to be a star, bring a movie.
Yeah, Moonbeams home in a jar. That's right. But yeah, they had an Sunday afternoon show there that just featured
Wilburn Brothers. Remember the Wilburn Brothers gave Loretta Lynn her. Start.
Yeah, you know, come on and
contract, just like Porter Wagner had Dolly Parton.
Dolly, yeah. So yeah, lots and lots of names and artists there. Hank Snow, Hank Williams, Hank Thompson.
There we go. That's more Western. That's more Western swing big band. Oriented, but
Oklahoma kind of version of.
He like play a Super 400 Gibson.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I love that thing.
Yeah.
The Travis style playing.
Yeah. So there's a style of picking that Jerry does actually fairly well there. Travis style.
What can he do?
What he can do anything.
Exactly.
He just yeah.
Put him on Mount Rushmore,
Yeah. So yeah, so there would be it would be hard to pick 4 artists. There's so many. There's 100, 200,000.
You would add, Jerry?
Well, I really like Merle Haggard and I like Waylon Jennings.
Oh.
How could you discount Willie?
I was just about to say something.
I grew up, at least part of the time that I was in school, I was in Arizona. I was born in Arizona, and eventually my folks moved back to Indiana. That's where I went to high school. But Waylon Jennings was getting started down in the Phoenix area about the time we left Arizona. And my older brother, who's 12 years older than me, he had been down to see him, and that was in the that was in his early days, and then eventually went to Nashville, and then Austin did all that.
Who can forget Johnny Cash?
Oh,
Dum 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 dum
Yeah.
dum dum dum.
Yeah. If I had a nickel. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, yeah, a lot of things.
I thought it was interesting. Sorry, jumping back to something you said way earlier. You were talking about how like the '90s was almost a renaissance of like what was happening in the '50s, right?
Hmm.
What I think is so interesting, Tim and I talked about that yesterday with contests. And like lately, it's been a renaissance. We've been going back to this Texas style, and I think that's really interesting. Maybe something we should look at in other genres to see how like the pendulum is swinging between like the extremes of a style, maybe, you know. And we see that in culture all the time.
Hmm.
We see it go all the way to one side, and we believe this, and da 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 da, and then who knows? Not even like a century later, it's completely on the other spectrum, like other side. So I thought that was an interesting point you brought up. I liked that.
I feel like mainstream radio right now doesn't play a lot of what I would call sort of interesting country. It's more rock and roll, and it's more, I don't know, just kind of rubber stamp. It feels like every artist comes up with kind of their version of the same song, you know, kind of thing. There's not much artistry. You don't hear the musicians, you know, playing a really cool riff or just letting them fly. You know, you don't hear that. There's too much background distortion, noise kind of thing. You know, again, it's almost a rock and roll feel there to it.
Virtuoso.
Yeah.
Jimmy Dean employed Roy Clark, you know, in that '50s era. And Roy Clark, and he let him play too. He let him get up there and rip. And who was it that employed Chet Atkins over in Eastern Tennessee? I don't remember.
Yes.
But before he went to Nashville and became a session player and a producer and all that,
Yeah.
he was employed by, it wasn't the Carter family, it was somebody over in that Eastern Tennessee area that employed him, and they would never know what he was going to do next.
Yeah.
You know, they employed virtuoso players and let them play.
Yeah, a lot of that artistry I don't think is kind of there, or it doesn't feel like it's there. You have to go to these little jam sessions on the side there, and you hear some really good players, kind of thing. So yeah, it's different now than it was. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's certainly different than it was.
Anything else you have to add?
That's way more than we know.
Hey, that was wonderful.
That's it.
Yeah.
You guys did wonderful. Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I guess we can play some tunes now.
Yeah.
Woo! All right.